Hello, welcome to the Inside the Birds pregame show. I'm Geoff Mosher alongside Adam Caplan. Joining us, as always, is Greg Cosell. And fellas, it's conference championship week. That's exciting, but it also means there's only 3 games left this season. The Eagles are definitely in one of them. They hope to be in 2. They will face the Washington Commanders in the NFC Championship, not the matchup that most expected going into the season. The Eagles survived a scare at home last Sunday. They beat the Rams 28-22, and the Commanders went into the Motor City and short-circuited the Lions 45-31 as the Jaden Daniels phenomenal rookie season extends another week at least. So, Adam, I want to start off with you and ask a very big picture question, because I think all of us here in this show would agree that the Eagles are the better 53-man, the better overall team, right? And usually when you have that, consensus is just play a good game, you should win. Do you think the Commanders need to do anything a little different, pull something out of the bag, or to kind of force the Eagles into their B-C+ game to win this game?
I think you got, at this point, talking to coaches over there, you do what you do, you run what you run. Now, John DiFilippo told us, the former Eagles quarterbacks coach who won a Super Bowl with them in 2017, you may bring something that you've run earlier this season, or you may have a couple new plays that you install, but you do what you do. You don't change your scheme. You don't change what got you there, of course. And we'll obviously assess what Greg thinks of kind of their schemes and so forth. But yeah, I think you just run what you run. But we did see in 2017 in the Minnesota game, the Eagles had a couple tricks in their bag, which was pretty cool.
Yeah. And so, Greg, I was going to switch that to you. Sometimes you'll see a lesser team on paper have to figure out ways, right, to try to beat the better team. Or sometimes, like the Eagles against the Vikings, as Adam was saying in 2017, they just decided, hey, we're good, but we're going to pull out a few extra things that the team hasn't seen. Do you always expect in playoff games, especially conference championship, Super Bowl, that you're going to see something that you probably didn't see on tape throughout the whole season?
Well, there's differences in those kinds of things. I mean, if you're talking about, let's say, a flea flicker, a team can always try a play like that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what teams do, and Adam nailed it, he's 100% right. What teams do is they work off what they've done all year, because you can't totally change conceptually and philosophically what you're doing. There's not enough practice time for that.
Right.
So, you can work off, like, for instance, a blitz. Let's say you have a blitz package. What you can do is switch up a player, so in other words, it's not the linebacker who blitzes in that particular concept, but maybe the safety is the blitzer, but it's the same concept. And then the offense just doesn't see it that way because they're used to, on their film study, for it being the linebacker who's the blitzer. So things like that, but you're not totally changing, your whole offense. Then it becomes degrees, Jeff. So in other words, let's say you're a high percentage cover one team on third down, which, for instance, the Commanders are. Maybe depending on the opponent, maybe you play a little less cover one. But it's not like all of a sudden, if you've played 5 snaps of a defense all year, that you're going to play that defense in this game, because the players just haven't played it enough to be able to make all the necessary adjustments within it.
Right. I'm glad you brought that up. Later in the show, when we get into offense versus defense and vice versa, Greg, there is an opponent-specific matchup that I'm wondering about,
right,
that I'll promise to ask you about, and we'll see what you say on that. Sometimes I overthink things, and I brought this up to you guys a couple of weeks ago. There was one play against the Packers that I can't get out of my mind, and it was the one snap all year long that Jalen Hurts went under center and threw a pass without play action. If you guys remember, it was a pass to Devontae Smith. And ever since, maybe
you're not going to see 20 of those in this game, Jeff. So
don't. No, you are not, Greg. But the one thing is, thank you. The one thing that is, they put that on film for a reason, right? Like, you don't just do that once just to do it once. And I just wonder if there's some kind of
foreshadowing, and it's possible
from it.
But, it's funny. My sense with someone like Dan Quinn, and we can get into more detail, as we move along, is I've always sensed with him defensively, even when he was with Dallas, and even, don't forget, he was the one who started the Legion of Boom. Even when he was in Atlanta, I get the sense that he's a guy that wants his players to play fast. And normally when you do that, you don't overload them mentally. and it has nothing to do with whether they're capable mentally. That's not my point. My point is you want them to be able to play fast, react, not have to think, not have to make too many adjustments. So I'm not saying he's not going to have a few things that might be different defensively. You never know. But I don't think you're going to see a whole bunch of different things from the Commanders' defense.
Let me jump in real quick. So the kind of thing you can do is what Flip told us when we talked to John on Patreon this week. When they went out, they made a decision for their tape study. They found something that they could do to Harrison Smith. They could get him out of position. And once they found that out, that was a big part of their game plan. John said, we're going to get Harrison Smith in this game. This is whatever their coaches talked about. I don't know what they found. This is 7 years ago, right? 7?
It sounds like they felt that they should just make him a conflict player based on
that was it. Yes,
we're going to get him to think, run, and pass on him.
Right.
That's the kind of thing you could put in, right? You don't change your scheme, but you find things that you think you could win on. That was
and
really
that's pretty normal as far as when you see certain defensive players who react. It's like corners, okay? It's like when we look at corners and we say, man, they're susceptible to stutter go, or they're going to jump routes.
Yes.
So you put in some plays where you see if they'll do that. But that's not changing your whole offensive game plan, So it's those kinds of things, Jeff.
All right. Well, we know injuries always play a big part of regular season games, playoff games, and they're going to play a role in this matchup, this huge NFC East Conference Championship between the Eagles and the Commanders. So let's get into the injury situation for the Eagles. A lot of bumps and bruises, but obviously from a health and being able to start standpoint, very good for the Eagles. We know Cam Jurgens and Dallas Goedert were concerns earlier in the week. Cam Jurgens with his back, Dallas Goedert with the ankle, missed some practice. They were both back on the field Friday. So that was good news for them and encouraging, and just have to see as it goes. Jalen Hurts has said in his press conference in his final one of the week that, he's working through the left knee injury and that he's going to wear a brace. So, Adam, when the quarterback says, I'm going to be wearing a brace, that signals what to you?
Well, this injury is real. It's his left knee. That's his plant leg. And it's something we're going to watch in the first quarter because we're going to know early on. One of the things I'll be looking for is, if they have design runs, or what happens when he scrambles, when the pocket breaks down, he decides to run, how well does he move? So the first quarter is going to tell us a lot. The cool thing is he has no game status designation. He did take all the ones on Friday. By the way, Goddard's going to start. I guess basically the players kind of spilled the beans. They kind of thought he was going to do it. Dallas said he was going to be able to play after Friday's practice. He has no game status designation. But the real one was Cam Jurgens with the back. He didn't take all the ones on Friday. So Jeff, that's you and I were talking earlier on Friday about that. A couple days ago, we're like, it's an offensive line with backs. You worry about that stuff. You never know what happens right before the game in pregame warmup. So, and we know what the response would be if he can't go. Dickerson will move over to center, and they'll use Tyler Steen. And Greg, I know you liked Tyler Steen's tape earlier this season.
I think he's played well when he's played this year. I mean, obviously it's not the same. That would be an area that's a perfect example. If that's the case in the game, a perfect example where the Commanders might do some things with their defensive front where they feel that they're isolating Steen. That's the kind of thing you could do.
Yeah, Eagles blessed with offensive line depth, and they do a good job of stocking the cupboard just in case of situations like this. So we'll see. As for defense, we saw Quinyon Mitchell exit the game early against the Rams with the shoulder injury. He's said he's good to go. So again, I think with the Eagles, it's not a question of who's starting or who's playing, more so than can they make it through the game? Will they be inhibited? And certainly, Greg, Hurts' ability to run and how much that is or isn't impacted both by the injury and the brace is going to play a role in what they can do offensively and what Washington will do defensively.
I think, and we won't know that until we're into the game, because obviously Hurts' ability as a runner, even if he doesn't run, is still a factor that defenses and the Commanders would have to prepare for, and that would impact how they would align their defense, whether it's their front, whether it's their second level, even the third level becomes involved in that. So we'll see, and clearly, and it's funny you mentioned that because we talked about this throughout the week, both with the Patreon group and then when we did our look back at the divisional playoff game, is and now I lost my train of thought, but just the point being that impacts greatly the Eagles' fourth down play calling.
Oh,
And that's the point I wanted to make. And that's what we talked about during the week, because this is an offense that when they pretty much get in plus territory, even if it's the 50-yard line, if it's fourth down and less than 4, they pretty much go for it. And Hurts is a big deal, a big factor on those kinds of play calls. So if he's limited and he can't be as big a factor, that could change the way the Eagles approach, let's say, 4th and 4 from the 50-yard line. So we won't know that until we're in the game, but it could truly have an impact.
Absolutely.
Beyond the obvious is what I'm saying,
Right. Yeah. Right. Not just from a player performance standpoint, but a strategic one as well. Absolutely.
Correct.
All right. The Commanders, generally also a healthy team, with the exception, of course, of their best offensive lineman, Sam Cosmi, right guard. He tore his ACL against the Lions in the divisional round. He will be replaced by veteran Trent Scott, who's played a little bit, but obviously Cosmi was their best, not just their best. I mean, he's a very good lineman and their best offensive lineman. So they have to make do without him. And then there's some bumps and bruises with other guys, Deron Payne, the knee, and Bobby Wagner with the ankle, Frankie Louvu, shoulder. The good news for them, though, Adam, is I know you're probably going to point this out, is Marshawn Lattimore. He always has to deal with his chronic hamstring injury, but should be good to go. I would think, based on, was it the last game or it was the last game they played where A.J. Brown got the best of Marshawn Lattimore a couple of times. I would think Lattimore's looking for a little revenge in this game.
Yeah, by the way, it's the first time Lattimore this week is not listed on the injury report with a hamstring injury since the trade. So that's significant. That's really significant when you look at their injury report. And by the way, Bobby Wagner's had this ankle injury for a number of weeks. He's good to go, but we'll see how he performs. But yeah, the thing is with this team is they've been fascinating the Commanders. This is one of those situations like you couldn't have believed it coming into the season they could be this good. But when you get really good quarterback play, man, it could take you a long way.
I just want to make one point about Bobby Wagner, who's may well be a first ballot Hall of Famer and deservedly so. I think there's been a clear drop-off in his play this year. And I think, one of the reasons, and he's not the only reason, but I'm only mentioning it because Adam just mentioned him, is one of the reasons I think they've struggled at times in the run game is I don't think he's seeing things the way we know he has in his career. That was one of the strengths of his game, just how he saw things, how quick he was key to diagnose. To me, and again, sometimes I watch these plays and really try to figure out every gap responsibility. So maybe I'm wrong at times. Obviously, I'm not the coach, so it's possible I'm wrong at times. But there are, to me, examples where he's just not in the right gap. And I think that's caused some issues in the run game at times because their run defense has been very spotty.
That's extremely fascinating of an observation, given the fact that he's playing in Dan Quinn's defense again, which is what he played in Seattle, where he was.
Well, but they're not playing the same defense. Exactly the same defense.
There you go.
I'm sure some of the principles are similar, but it's not the same Legion of Boom schematic defense that they played in Seattle.
And Jeff, we have to remember he's 34 and a half years old.
Yeah.
This is what guys have long retired. The kind of guys who are playing now are quarterbacks. Darius Slay, corner, the only one at 34 years old or older. Kickers and punters and long snappers, and maybe a receiver too. So that's interesting that through Greg's tape study, he noticed
and that's a tape comment. That's not,
Bobby
Wagner's he's like I said, he's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer and deservedly so.
Yeah,
but
it's fascinating.
I was speaking to a coach. This was about a different player. The coach actually reached out to me and asked me about a player. And then we went back and forth and he said, Father Time catches up to every player. So, I mean, it just, it's no knock on Bobby Wagner. It's just what the tape shows.
Right. So this really parlays well into our breakdown segment. And one of the questions I wanted to get your opinion on, Greg, as we talk about the Eagles offense against this Commanders defense, is that the Commanders under Dan Quinn, seem to be an aggressive team. I think they blitz a decent amount.
They do.
And they play a decent amount of man coverage. That would be correct. I don't know if you have the exact.
Played a little less over the last month or so, just because they haven't felt comfortable at corner. They benched St. Just. Lattimore's been in and out of the lineup, obviously. Now, again, they may play more this week because Lattimore, as Adam said, had no injury designation. He seems to be totally healthy. So it's look, the number one thing, when we do this, we kind of, talk about all different kinds of things. But number one, you got to stop the run game, and that's not a profound statement. But they may feel like, hey, let's match up on the outside and let's get as many people as we can to stop the run game. You don't know. That could be one approach they take. But they played a little less man over the last month or so, just because I think they haven't felt super comfortable at corner on the outside. St. Jude's got benched for a reason.
Yeah. And that really led me to believe, would they, come out of the shell a little bit strategically? When I say come out of their shell, I don't mean two shell. I mean like what they normally do.
Right.
Because A, to stop the run, it's probably better to be in zone for most teams. Theoretically. And B, if you look at Jalen Hurts' passing lately versus man versus zone, clearly he has struggled when teams zone him up. And so you wonder if the quote unquote change up, or the team that feels the need to maybe switch it up a little bit more than they normally do would be Washington here and play a little bit more zone on the back end. But you can still be aggressive up front and play zone on the back end. We see that all the time.
And I think that comes down to situational football. That comes down to down and distance, field location, any number of things, because like I said, and they know this, and they've even talked about it publicly, that they've got to stop Saquon Barkley on every down, every time. They know what the deal is here. And so the question is, how do they feel in terms of their fronts versus their coverage is the best way to match up to Barkley in that run game? Because that's what they have to stop. I'm not saying they'd be willing to give up 50-yard touchdowns. That's not my point. But everything with the Eagles starts with the run game. They've got the best run blocking O-line in the league. These guys are dominant players. Now, again, the Jurgen situation, we don't know. But if he goes and the guards are Dickerson and Becton, they've got the two biggest guards in the league. Their O-line, Mailata is a terrific run blocker. This is a really difficult O-line to play against when it comes to run blocking.
Right. Yeah. Discipline, tackling. We saw the Rams, do a good job on like 80% of Saquon Barkley's runs, but it's the other ones that they really had trouble on. Adam, I believe that opponents, when they go to face the Eagles, they have this understanding, right, that they'll probably give up maybe 2 or 3 explosive to Saquon, and then it's how do you play on the other, 57 to 60 some odd snaps that there might be in a game. And if you're going to beat the Eagles, that's where you have to win. You have to win on those snaps and know that you're probably going to give up a few to Saquon. It's sort of a bend but don't break philosophy there.
It is, but you can never take, not that a team takes a play off, but you just can't think that you've got him.
Right.
Because it seems something happens in the second half. Ask the Rams that in 2 games. There's just something happens right when you think, okay, well, he's not going to have one of those games. Then he does. And it's a backbreaker. It's like a team in the NBA who hits like 10 3-pointers. You're embarrassed by it because you're playing really good defense. And then the guy has this explosive run getting back to Barkley, and it's a backbreaker. It's no different than a 90-yard bomb. If a receiver catches 2 90-yard bombs in a game, it's embarrassing, no matter how well you play in the other plays. So it's a tough deal. And Greg brought it up. They're very inconsistent against the run. That's not a good thing when you're going against Saquon Barkley.
And one thing which is very easy to say, I was talking about this with Darius Butler when we shot the matchup show, because he played safety and corner.
Yep.
You'd like to be able to tell your safety, particularly if it's a post safety, don't fill so quick. Wait and see where Barkley goes, because if you fill where you think you're supposed to, and all of a sudden he just cuts, you've got no shot whatsoever. We've seen that many, many times. He's just too fast. Now that's easy to say, and D Butts was saying the same thing. You can talk that, and coaches can drill it into you. But when you see, you just react. It's hard.
What are you gonna? The play's going on.
Hard.
Look, I think there's some similarity between that kind of thought process, Greg, and the way you're coached to rush a passer versus rushing Jalen Hurts. You don't,
correct,
as a pass rusher,
or Jaden Daniels for that matter. Yeah.
Right. There you go. Or Jaden Daniels.
Yeah.
As a pass rusher, you kind of abandon some of your natural instincts to get too high up the field because Hurts will run past you. Same thing in run defense. You may not want to shoot so fast as you're saying.
Yeah.
To be on the wrong side of Saquon Barkley.
Oh, actually, I want to throw this at Greg off what you just said, Jeff. When I used to sit with you and Jaws, Greg, and particularly Jaws would say this about hero ball. And I'm like, what does that mean? And he would go, see what the heck just happened there? Greg, explain what hero ball is.
Yeah, defense, and look, we hear all the time, people who follow the NFL for years and years have always heard, that Bill Belichick would say, do your job, okay? And every coach says that, by the way. So the point is, in every defense, there's disciplines, there's where you have to be within the context of a defense. So you have to stay there and play your role. Don't step out of that and try to do something. And that's hero ball, where you step out of the discipline and your role within that particular called defense and try to do something else. Right. Because invariably it comes back to haunt you. Bill Parcells was big on that as well. It's to do your job. We call a defense. 11 guys have a role in every defense we call. They've got a responsibility. They have to be in a certain spot. They have certain, rules within that defense. Stay with that and do your job. Don't try to step outside of that.
Greg, have you noticed the Commanders lately doing anything differently defensively from a personnel grouping standpoint? You're mentioning Bobby Wagner, just maybe not the same. Have they played maybe more big nickel or?
Well, yeah. I mean, the things I noticed watching their defense is, number one, they're very they play a lot of defensive linemen. Now, obviously, Daron Payne, who knows? But the point is, they play 9 defensive linemen that all get 20 or more snaps every game. So they play a lot of guys on their defensive line, and they're good. It's not like they're putting scrubs in there. They're good players. Defensively, they do play big nickel as their predominant base defense. Big nickel meaning 3 safeties. Butler, number 35, is the 3rd safety with Chin and Martin. Now, if they were to play against, let's say, 3 tight ends or 22 personnel, which the Eagles really don't do, then they might play kind of a base 4-3. But I don't know how much of that you'd get against the Eagles, because the Eagles don't really do that. But right. Big nickel is kind of their base defense. So big nickel means they have 4 down linemen, 2 linebackers, 3 safeties, and 2 corners.
So then Igbiani?
He's not in the game in big nickel.
Right.
Yeah,
okay.
Just their nickel, yeah.
And
he's their conventional nickel slot corner.
He's a small guy. He's the type of guy that if you're the Eagles, you want them on the field and try to run at, because you probably feel you can make some hay there, I would think.
He'd be on the field in versus 11 personnel.
How's he held up, by the way, moving to nickel, Greg?
He's done well. I mean, keep in mind, they benched St. Jude's. Iggy's still playing. He's their nickel. I mean, he's done a nice job. He's played most of the season at nickel for them.
So if the Eagles went 12 personnel, which they did a little bit both times against the Commanders, are they more apt to be being big nickel?
Yes, but I think there'd also be a down and distance element to that, a field location element to that, a feel to that, how the game is going. Right. Yeah, I think there's, because a lot of times when I watch tape, of many teams, and I'll see, let's say, a team play nickel versus base, and I think, how come they decided to do that? Or play base versus 11, and I think, how come they decided to do that? And it's funny, when Steve Spagnuolo was in my office the year he was not coaching and he would come in every Monday, I would ask him a lot of these questions, and some were really complex answers, and that, based on film study and all kinds of things, that because he has way more information than I have. And sometimes the answer would be, I just felt like a change up. I mean, so there's multiple, so that's why, you don't really know the answer to that stuff.
Yeah. I'm interested to see if the Eagles decide after, the first drive or two, if they decide to live in 11 personnel and try to get Iggy on the field for the Commanders as much as possible and run out of that. And
they could run at him. A lot of teams run at the nickel.
Yeah, absolutely. How about Marshawn Lattimore's tape, Greg, when healthy? How has that looked?
Marshawn Lattimore is a classic case of a guy that has extremely high-level talent with really poor technique his whole career, but he's so gifted that he can do things that a lot of other corners can't do, but he'll get DPI penalties. He'll turn his body the wrong way at times, but then he'll make plays that you go, oh my God, how do you do that? He's just one of those guys. He's so physically gifted.
Well, this is the shame, Adam, because A.J. Brown's the type of guy that is also so physically gifted that he feasts off guys who don't have good technique, who aren't clean, with the late hands, with the physicality. And you saw him do that against Lattimore in the last time they played. But that might have been the last time that we've seen a really, really big game from A.J. Brown. And that part of the offense is –
because Lattimore had a bunch of 2 or 3 or more PPIs in that game.
3. Yeah, he had 3. Yeah. So I hope – and by the way, with A.J. Brown's knee, we should mention that he felt – and he told the reporters that he's doing better. And by the way, he practiced more this week. Not that it's a ton, more than he had in recent weeks. So that's a good thing. So let's see, Greg. By the way, did you notice that? Because you told us 2 weeks ago you did notice his knee was an issue.
This week it was hard to notice because of the weather and because a lot of guys were moving very gingerly. So it was hard to know if guys were moving gingerly because of injury or just because the snow started, and then it's tough to move.
Yeah. Okay. All right, let's finish off the offense with a conversation on this. And for the purpose of a true pregame analysis, let's assume Hurts is functional enough to throw the ball all right. And, maybe even if his mobility is a little bit limited, he can still go in the pocket and make plays. Let's assume that, because anything less than that, that's a totally different conversation. And
we don't, and that becomes speculation.
Of
course,
we're
not going to do that, right?
Of course. Exactly. So when I ask this question, I don't mean it, how might they do this because of his injury? I just mean this in general. How do you think, especially based on the last 2 opponents and what they've done, Greg, that Washington will look to pressure Jalen Hurts? Will they look to send multiple guys but play zone on the back end? Or do you think they might stick more to their man principles when they get to 3rd down and 4th down?
Well, Washington's a heavy stunt team, and I think you're going to see it. I think what they're going to try to do with Hurts is show him space. So green grass, knowing that he'll react to the green grass in front of him, knowing that it's going to be closed up. Okay? And I remember having conversations with coaches years and years ago about Michael Vick, when Michael Vick was really an anomaly. There were not many Michael Vicks. Now there's many more quarterbacks in the league that will run. And I remember a coach telling me that, and I think we saw this on a couple of snaps when they played in both of the games this year, week 11, I believe, and week 16, where the coach told me about Vic. Hey, we want to show him where to run, and he will run, and then we're going to have somebody there that he doesn't initially see. So in a sense, 2 people are involved. So I think that there'll be times where, with their stunt concepts, when they're in dime, Frankie Louvu is almost always an edge rusher in their dime, not a linebacker, an edge rusher. So you have a lot of juice there because he's a great athlete. So it wouldn't surprise me if they try to show Jalen, hey, there's some space, and then they try to close that space. So, just as and you do that tactically. So, but they're a heavy stunt team.
Adam, I give Jalen a lot of credit. He takes a ton of hits and does not fumble the ball. I mean, and look at Matthew Stafford. Got hit a bunch. I think he had a fumble, had a couple of passes off.
They don't turn it over.
No. Yeah. And listen, that's not a sideways compliment for me either. Someone who takes that many hits and still figures out a way to hold on to the ball. Yeah. Does it back out of a field goal every once in a while? Sure. Does it, do you get a safety? Yeah. Those aren't great. And I'm not making excuses for it, but I guarantee you watch most quarterbacks get sacked as much as Jalen has been taking sacks this year, and they probably have twice as many turnovers as Jalen Hurts has.
Yeah, and that's I didn't mean to jump on Adam, but that's critical because of their defense too. So what if you have to punt? So the other team has to go 85 yards. That's not easy to do against the Eagles.
Right.
That's the point that Greg just made, is that it's okay. The coach will tell you, live for another down. If you throw it out of bounds or it goes in the dirt, that's okay, because you go to the next down, or as Greg said, you punt. But man, the turnovers last year, it was just a number of them. I mean, Greg always says you got to grade them each individually. Yeah. But he's not turning it over. He's also not fumbling. We saw fumbles last year. This is a big reason why they're there. Yeah, everybody wants the passing game to be better. Everybody knows this. But when you don't turn it over with that run game, which he's a part of, and if his knee allows it with that defense, this is why they're here.
100%. Now, ideally, you don't want to be taking 7 sacks and a safety in a conference championship game. Ideally, you don't want to do that. And there are some decisions that Hurts could make better, even when the play isn't there, to make sure he's not losing yardage. But in general, like we said, you got this running game, you got this defense, you play to that, and that's what the Eagles have done well. Even in playing conservatively, they've been able to score points and win the game. Want to flip it now and talk about the Eagles' defense against this Commanders' offense. I'm really curious about Vic Fangio, because if there's going to be one person who probably doesn't do a whole lot different or doesn't change or doesn't come out of what he normally does, Greg, it would be Vic. I mean, I think Vic has gotten to this point with this defense doing what they do best, which is ordinarily rushing 4, whether that's down lineman or a sim, and playing some variation of zone or some man on the back end. And Cliff Kingsbury made a great point this week. He said that the Eagles play with an elite level of spatial recognition. I'm paraphrasing a little bit.
They do.
That they just maximize the space, their bodies and the space on the field better than he's ever seen anyone do it.
Yeah, and that relates to he said it really well. That relates to what I've talked to you guys about all season, about how it's the little details about where guys are. It's, those are the little details. And by the way, that relates to our earlier conversation about you can't change a ton because these guys are so good at executing what they've been executing all season that you don't want to all of a sudden start putting in new things and then you lose that just enough that you can start giving up big plays. But just to make one point, which plays off this, I'm very curious, and we know that Vic's not a big blitzer, okay? But I'm curious in third down situations. It is a 100% guarantee that they're going to slide the center to Carter because they're not going to have Trent Scott block Jalen Carter 101. It is 100%. Okay. So my question is, or my thought process is Vic, not every time, but is he just going to have something on the other side of that because he knows it'll be 2 versus 2, something that causes a problem for the protection. And again, like I said, he's not going to do that 10 times, but I just have to believe that there's going to be something because they are going to slide the center to Scott's side to deal with Carter.
Geoff, I was going to add that if something happened, by the way, the Chris Paul's a kid they really like. Not that Chris Paul, but the other Chris Paul, not the NBA Chris Paul, but Chris Paul started 7 games last year for the Commanders and 1 in his rookie season. They really like him. He's got strong hands. He's one of the strongest linemen they have, but he's very raw, needs technique work. So, man, Trent Scott, Geoff, as we turn it back to you, Trent Scott's a guy that, talking to some people who've worked with him in the past, he's really not a left tackle. He's a right tackle who's been cross-trained at both guard spots. This is a matchup, man. And Greg's right, they'll have a plan for it. But sometimes when you have a plan, it doesn't always work because you're going against Jalen Carter.
Yeah,
so
what does Mike Tyson
very
say?
interested to
Everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the mouth.
Right. Thank you, Mike Tyson.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, Greg, and I know this is probably a bad analogy question because the Lions, with all their injuries, didn't really have anybody in Jalen Carter's stratosphere on their line. But when Trent Scott had to go in and play, what did they do? How did it look for the Commanders' offensive line there? And did the Lions try to do anything to create 5-man blocking situations against him?
And when did he get hurt? I made a note of that in the
Commanders'
offense.
Second quarter. I could be wrong.
Hold on. I did make a note. Let's see. Yeah, it was probably second quarter, wasn't it?
I thought it was. Yeah.
Anyway, the point is that
it was right on the 2-yard touchdown run by Brian Robinson in the second.
That's right. That's where it was. That's exactly where it was.
Cosby played 29 snaps. Go ahead.
So let's set the context here. He basically has to play the entire second half, and coming out of the break, that's still a game. I think the Lions scored and made it a 1-possession game at one point there in the early in the third quarter.
Oh yeah, they did. They did it. They made it 31-28.
Yep.
I mean, the Lions, there were times that they, rushed 5. I mean, they didn't necessarily step out of what they do. They play a lot of cover 1. Like, for instance, after Cosme got hurt, they had a late second quarter TD drive where Daniels hit Brown for 38 yards. I don't know if you remember that play. Yep. The Lions were in big nickel. They rushed 5 with cover 1 behind it. And they actually, and Melanfanu added in as the 6th rusher because he was matched on the tight end Bates, who stayed in to block. So, they don't have Jalen Carter, so they don't have one guy that you have to truly worry about.
Right.
But I think that's going to be a real interesting aspect of this game, Geoff, is because Jalen Carter almost always lines up on the left side of the defensive line, which would be on over Scott. And they're not they're going to go in this game with the idea that we cannot let Jalen Carter ruin our game, that we cannot let that happen.
Right.
I mean, Jalen Carter is arguably the best defensive tackle in the league right now, and you just can't let him ruin your game.
How would you describe Washington running backs and blitz pick up, because if Vic does want to try to create, an extra pressure to create a one-on-one, but they keep a back in. I guess I asked that, but it doesn't matter, because if Jaden Daniels makes 2 moves, and who cares?
Right. Although Robinson's pretty good.
Okay, good.
Yeah. But they also line up in pony a bit, where they have 3 backs. 2 backs, but sort of because they have Robinson, Eckler, and McNichol. So whatever combination they use, but they will line up with 2 backs at times.
Right. Adam, it's hard not to think about Austin Eckler in a game like this, because as we're constantly told, the way to beat Vic Fangio's defense, to have the best chance, is to go the death by 1,000 cuts route and just, take those voids in the zone, take the flats, take the comebacks when you can. And we saw Eckler have a pretty good game the first game against the Eagles. He didn't play in the second game. Ironically, the Washington Commanders won that game. But I feel like he's got to be a big part of the game plan for the Commanders if it's going to follow the script that you beat this defense working the ball down the field.
Yeah, a couple things. So Eckler led them in receiving in that first game with 9 targets. He had 8 receptions. He had a big 34-yarder, and he looked really healthy. He had a concussion and other injuries this season, but they used him last week. So he's a guy who's dangerous. You and I, Jeff, talked about coming into the season. Boy, these linebackers in training camp weren't great in coverage. Let's see what happens. And then, for the most part, their linebackers have handled the running backs in the pass game. It hasn't been a real problem. Mm-hmm. But Eckler does look healthy. I know he's kind of winding down his career, but you're right. He is an outlet guy if the Eagles get pressure.
And Greg, to capitalize off that, in the Packers game, when Nakobe Dean got hurt, a guy like Josh Jacobs was able to make some yards catching the ball out of the backfield. The Rams really don't throw to Kyren Williams the same way as the Packers do to Jacobs, and as the Commanders will do to Austin Eckler. So that's a matchup to me that's worth watching now.
The other thing which I really want to mention, because you're going to see it, and I mentioned it this week, earlier in the week, is they had a number of snaps of pure air raid formation where they had 10 personnel on the field. Eckler had a 35-yard run to start the fourth quarter, and it came out of a pure air raid formation with 10 personnel on the field, 1 back, 4 wide receivers. And by pure air raid, I mean they had double stacks outside the numbers, meaning just 2 or 3 yards from the sideline, double stacks outside the numbers, okay? And it's really hard to defend because you have the zone read element of the inside zone concept with Daniels. And on that particular play, because of the Daniels factor, they basically only had to block 3 guys, and Eckler ran for 35 yards. And they're going to show that, and they're going to see how Vic handles that. And then they'll have an answer, and then they'll see how much they want to deploy it during the game. But that's hard because, if it's 4 wide receivers so far, split, you can't just ignore them. You can't say, oh, no, they're not going to throw it and bring guys into the box. You can't do that. So I'm really curious to see how that plays out.
You get kind of a triple option out of that too, right? You can hand it off, you can run it with your running back, or you can probably throw it to one of your wide receivers, whether it's a screen or
there's
a
3,
slant.
Yeah. But the point is, the Lions had a 5-man box, and they ended up with only 3 to play side because 2 guys dealt with the Daniels factor, because he has a lot of room to run too. If he were to get past the line of scrimmage, because everything's so spread, he probably runs for 20+ yards, if not more.
Right. See, that's the guy, Greg, of all the coordinators and coaches here, this is the one, Cliff Kingsbury, that I'm thinking is up at night this week, right? Thinking of that 1 or 2 gotcha type plays that maybe they haven't shown, because we know the Eagles are coaching conservatively on offense. We know that Vic Fangio is going to do what he does on defense. We know that Dan Quinn, for the most part, and Joe Witt Jr. are going to do what they do on defense. I feel like Cliff Kingsbury has the potential to be the X factor here with his, ability to reach into the bag and come out with something.
Sure. And I think there'll be, something, we'll see what it is, but, it's the Daniels factor is very much a big deal. I mean, just think back to the 4th and 11 play in the Week 16 game at the end of the third quarter when you're thinking, okay, the Eagles got this game in the bag. It's 4th and 11, and he runs for 29 yards.
Right.
Hey, one question, though, Greg, for you here, because we remember what you'd showed us and told us about what Vic brought, the New Orleans game where they walked Bond down, which they'd not shown on tape before. Has Quinn done anything against the run that you could recall this season where there was a team that had a great running back and they changed anything up? Anything particular?
Well, look, they're a 4-man front team, but they often put Luvo on the ball, so they go to a 5-man front. Yes,
gotcha.
And see what they'll do a lot is they'll put Luvo on the ball, and if they're in big nickel, let's say, then so they don't just have one stacked player in Wagner, they'll bring either Chin or Butler, the third safety, down in the box, and it becomes essentially a 5-2 front with a single post safety Martin, behind. So that's what they'll do. But they won't go with 6-man fronts because I haven't seen that.
Gotcha.
Greg, at the beginning of the year, it looked like the Commanders were getting a lot out of Terry McLaurin in the passing game and then spreading it around. Noah Brown had kind of emerged for them. He then went out with an injury. Since maybe, I don't know, week 12, 13, have you seen Dyami Brown become more of their offense? Is he someone that Jaden Daniels seems to target or trust a little bit more as the season?
Well, I mean, don't forget, you have to throw it to someone. And, McLaurin's the only guy who would be considered a big-time receiver, and he's really good. And then so you have to throw it to somebody else. So Dyami Brown has been targeted a decent amount, and, he's done okay. I mean, I think the big thing, you could say this with Hurts too, and there's more and more quarterbacks like this in the league. But the big thing when you play their pass game is not just playing within the structure of it. But it's what happens after that. So in a sense, you have to have two defenses, Jeff. You have to have your normal structured defense that works when there's between 2 and 2.5 seconds. But then you have to have another defense after that when Daniels does whatever he does. And it can't just be random. You have to practice that. It takes practice time. So in a sense, you have to have two defenses. And that takes longer to practice.
Mm-hmm. So we've seen the Eagles, Greg and Adam, we've seen them put Zach Bond on the line of scrimmage if they want to be in nickel, but they want some extra run defense, right? And that creates a really interesting alignment where it could be like a 5-1 and it exposes the middle of the field a little bit. And now you don't have Nakobe, you have Oren Burks there. I do wonder if, and I'll ask you, Greg, does Washington use 12 personnel? Okay, so that's a way.
I mean, they're not at the top of the league in it, but they use it a meaningful amount. Sure.
So you wonder if they did, if the Eagles would stay in nickel and walk Bond down, or does Washington just try to want to, do something out of a nickel look that makes them get Bond onto the line of scrimmage so they can try to split the middle of the field?
I would think, again, we don't know, and I'm not Vic Fangio. I would bet that would be based on down and distance and field location. Yes. Because maybe if it's 1st and 10, deep in their own, at the 20-yard line or 30-yard line, the Eagles might go base, and take DeJean out. But if it's within a drive and they're moving, I don't know. I get the feeling they don't want to take DeJean off the field too much.
Yeah, I think there's a good reason for that, right?
Yeah.
He's been a big part of what they do.
Let me ask Greg one question on Cliff Kingsbury, because you've studied him since his days with the Cardinals. How has he evolved? Because you just mentioned 10 personnel, but
good question, Adam.
He was Mr. 10 personnel to start, but I don't think it changed. How's he changed?
I think Kingsbury, and again, I've met him, but I don't know him. I think he's done a remarkable job given his background, because his background was pure air raid, okay? And air raid has a lot of elements to it. It's no huddle tempo. It's 10 personnel. It's wide formations. It's not really a lot of progression reading. And he got to the league and he didn't have that kind of personnel with the Cardinals. And he changed. He's evolved. He played a lot of 12 and 13 personnel with the Cardinals. And now with the Commanders, we just mentioned they do play 12. They'll play 13 at times. They have the rookie Sanat from, Kansas State who plays snaps. So I think he's really evolved, and it shows, an openness to, not that he needs me to talk about him. He's obviously a lot smarter than I am about his offense, but I just think he's done a really good job of not getting caught up in this is what I do, of understanding that you need to evolve and grow and do some different things based on just the league as a whole, but your personnel as well. Sure. So, I again, like I said, I've met him. I don't know him, but I think he's done a great job.
Interesting. But the no huddle is still a big part, right? They are the number one no huddle team in the
almost
NFL.
65% of their snaps are no huddle.
Wow.
So, I mean, that's a big, big deal. It's a really big deal for what they do.
which is another reason why for the Eagles, you probably want to stay in nickel to have DeJean on the field and be able to defend the run out of it. You don't want to have to be caught trying to sub a guy like Jordan Davis out or on and DeJean on or out because of that. You'd like to be able to have an identity there and stick with it and not be caught with a couple men on the field.
Right. Yeah.
So it'll be a very interesting cat and mouse game there. Let's wrap this up and do what we do best, and that is predict the final outcome of the game and then pick our MVP. Greg, I start with you. I know you have spent so much time this week trying to figure out the final score and the player of the game.
Let me ask you something, Greg, as you think about it. Who spent more time, Sal Powell on tape or you on your pick? Because Sal, I love what he says. In my 35 seconds.
It was a big week for Sal. I think he did a minute and 40 seconds as opposed to a minute 38, as he normally says when we're on the show.
Good to know.
Well, it's playoffs. You got to put the extra time in.
I know, exactly. I'm just saying what
he
says, so he won't get upset by that.
Matchup show. What do we got before you give your score? Anything? It's going to be a great show. What do you got in that show?
Which games are you? Which games are you previewing?
Yeah. What are the great plays we'll see?
I mean, there's a lot of good. Darius did Barkley. There's certain things you have to do with certain teams. I mean, Barkley he did. What the heck did I do? We shot it today, and I feel like that happened about 3 weeks ago.
I'm going to guess something Chiefs related with you. No.
Oh, well, it's funny. I did just what I said about Jaden Daniels, and I thought it worked really well. This whole idea about I actually showed the 4th and 11 play from Week 16, but I also showed a play from their wild card game against the Bucs that relates to the point I made about having two defenses. Because what happens is when he gets out of the pocket, it breaks down the discipline of the defense. That's the problem,
right.
And it happens, to too many teams. I did the Chiefs 3-play blitz sequence in the fourth quarter. Did you guys watch that game?
Yep.
Oh
yeah.
So in the fourth quarter, remember, it was a 20-12 game. On second down and third down and fourth down, they blitzed.
Yeah.
And that's Spags to a T. He blitzed 10 times in the fourth quarter alone.
Yeah.
I
remember a tight end and a running back both trying to block George Karlaftis on fourth down and being
right. On fourth down, they had the tight end Schultz trying to block him one-on-one. But that happened because of the front. See, that's what Spags is so great at. Yep. So I did that. I also did a piece on the Bills using a spy against Mahomes because the Bills are a big spy team. For instance, they spied every third down snap against Lamar last week. Mm-hmm. And then they spied Mahomes when they played Week 11. Mahomes had no rushing yards in that game. No rushing yards.
Wow. Not often you see that one.
Yeah. So anyway, that's in the matchup show. And, so it's hopefully it all worked out well. But getting to this game, it's, I've just become so enamored with the Eagles O-line. I mean, it's, to me, I know their defense is great. Barkley's great. And that's not the point. It's because I don't want people to think, you don't think the other people are good. But I just think this O-line is so dominant as run blockers. And, it's just, they just wear you out. And they're so big. I mean, you got Mailata. What does he weigh, Adam? You tell me. I mean,
right, 375, 380.
There you go. They got Dickerson and Becton. I mean, those guys are, you're dealing with two guys right there that weigh 700 pounds. I mean, it's
more than that probably.
Yeah, it's just so big, and they're agile. They move well. They work together well. I just really think that it's hard. It's hard. So I'm going to pick Barkley again. I know I picked him last week. It might seem like an easy out, but I just don't see the Eagles stepping out of who they are. And I just think that, look, Barkley gained almost 300 yards in the 2 games against the Commanders this year. He has the most rushing yards in 2 games in a playoff. And, I mean, I just think it makes sense.
All right. You got a score?
Oh, I have to do that too?
Yeah, we do that every week for the last, 5.
Right. Yeah. I'm getting old, Jeff. I forgot that part. And weather's not going to be an issue this week. Yep. So I'm going to pick 31-26.
Oh, Eagles?
Yes.
Okay, because Barkley was your player of the game. Okay, Adam, what do you got? Give me a score and a player of the game.
I've got it. Commanders 20, Eagles 23. And I've got it.
I knew you were saving that for this. Go ahead.
And our show favorite, and I haven't done this much with him, is number 93 because when I talk about this guy, most teams will say the number, not the player. They go,
Right,
93 is a really good player. We got to be aware of him, or whatever phrase they use. That's Milton Williams, our guy. He's going to be the player of the game. And I know Greg says they line up guy. They don't really move their tackles. Maybe they'll angle, whatever they do. Milton Williams is going to be a factor in this game, and he's my player of the game.
I love that you're picking Milton Williams. I mean, like I said, we got to rename our Inside the Tape show Inside Milton Williams' Tape.
Seriously, I've been waiting. I don't know why I've done Nolan Smith. I've done everyone else but this guy, so we had to do it.
All right. Well, by the way, the Eagles, at least for most of the week, were 6-point favorites. You guys both are picking the Commanders to cover. Very interesting. And guess what? I am too. But I'm not picking them to win. I'm going with the Eagles 27-23. And along the lines of you, Adam, I'm picking a defensive guy because these moments were made for Jalen Carter one more time. Yeah. Jalen Carter takes the Eagles to the Super Bowl because I kind of think it's going to be 27-23 with Commanders having one last chance, one last drive, just like the Rams, and Jalen Carter is going to put an end to it. So It is a clean sweep. Eagles win, according to all of us. Washington covers, according to all of us. You know the phrase, good teams win, great teams cover. So we'll see what happens. And maybe, guys, there's one more Inside the Birds pregame show left this season.
Well, there would be if we're all right.
That's right.
It would be if we are all correct. And if not, we better duck because the comments are going to be pretty ugly. Anyway, that's going to do it for this edition of the Inside the Birds pregame show. For Greg Cosell and Adam Caplan, I'm Geoff Mosher. Enjoy the game, everybody, and good luck.